So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation today, please type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and we will get to them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to the April 26th edition of Crop Talk. And kind of been a quiet week if you look out into the fields. I guess the storm system that came through definitely gave a lot of areas snow, and I guess over the past few days we've definitely been seeing that snow go down. And I think with the rain that's happening this morning and forecasted it over the next few days, I think we'll probably see most of that snow be gone, but I think it's going to wet the ground a bit, and I think we might see another 4 or 5 days before we see anything major happening. I'm seeing a lot more air seeders in the yards hooked up as producers are getting things ready to go. So I think we're definitely just waiting for conditions to be right, and we'll definitely be going out in the fields. I know you look at some of the reports from the west. I think mainly from Alberta. I think some guys are going there already, so that's a good sign to see. Soil temperatures have increased. I was looking last night on our website at some of the weather stations, and you definitely see a lot of the soil temperatures are staying above zero for the whole day now. So I think we're definitely going to see some fast growth happening when we do get a little bit of heat here. So conditions are improving every day. Next week, I guess this is definitely showing that we're getting close. Next week we'll be starting our crop reporting for the year. So you'll be able to see the crop reports available on our website starting next week. And just a little plug out there, if you're interested in helping as a reporter, if you could get in touch with one of your extension specialists in the area, and they can kind of give you a little bit of a update as to what we need. And if you wanted to give us a hand doing them, it's always nice to get as much input as we can, because it just makes the report that more accurate. So if you're interested, later on in the webinar, I'll have the crop extension specialists contact information, so that you'll be able to get it from there. I guess being that we aren't in the field right now, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to get Darren Bond on again. Darren's a farm management specialist and has done a lot of stuff with budgets and most recently, I guess, the fertilizer program that came out through Manitoba Ag. So I thought it'd be a good idea to maybe get Darren on to maybe talk a little bit about land rental prices. I think grain prices have maybe spurred a increase in land rental prices, and thought it'd be maybe just good to go through how to figure out what you can afford to pay. Maybe maybe even some, I think Darren might even go over some leasing agreements that maybe can be made. And so I guess with that, I'll let Darren take it over, and then we'll head into some questions after he's done. So Darren, if you want to take over the screen.
Sure. Thank you very much, Lionel. Thanks for having me out again to talk about this. I'm just going to bring my screen up here. So you should be seeing that here shortly.
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about land rent values, and the big question is how much, too much, what can we afford, and all that good stuff. So on our farm management team, this is the number one asked question that we face. I would say we probably get more questions from landlords than producers, but we still get a lot of producers calling us about this. And it's very basic to see that there's no market listing for land rents, right? It's not like land sales where you can search land titles and see what some transactions were. It's a dark market. Also, both producers and landlords very reluctant to reveal these rates, so it leads to a lot of coffee shop chatter. And I figured, it's a second slide. It's time for a little land rental story about this. one morning I had a bunch of calls, all kind of one after the other from this one area of the province saying, have you heard about these land rents? Land rents seem to have jumped by quite a bit in our little area. What's going on? And have you heard anything? And, no, I haven't heard anything. But these calls kept on coming. So it wasn't until later in the afternoon that I got a call from a producer who's wanting some help with our grain bin and farm building rental calculator. And he was from that area. And he said, "Oh, I hear that there's some pretty healthy rents being bid in your area." And there was silence on the phone. My heart dropped and I thought, "Oh dear, what did I just step into now?" And he started chuckling. He says, "Well, that might be me." I said, "Oh, how so?" So he goes to explain the story about how his farming neighbor is retiring, came to him and offered him to buy or offered him to rent the land. But with that also came with a pretty significant vineyard. His vineyard was actually more storage than what this new rental would be, but the farmer thought this was actually a pretty good deal because he was bagging a lot of grain. He was short on storage anyway, so he figured it was a good package to be able to get into this vineyard and have a little bit better storage. So as you can probably guess where this story is going, that the land rent that was bid also included this significant vineyard. So the coffee shop crew didn't really understand this and didn't account for the value of those bins and farm buildings. So obviously the dollar amount sounded like quite a bit. But with working with this client and backing off those bin rentals and the pole shed rentals, actually the land rental bid was kind of right in the middle of the range for the area, and it was nothing to cause any concern. I jokingly told this producer, "Well, maybe you should take out a full page ad in the local paper saying, the bin or the land rent also included bins. So, maybe reduce some of the stress and anxiety in the area." But that's the challenge with this, right? Is that we hear things, but we don't always hear the whole story. So we start to jump to some conclusions. So really the only way to really know what these rental rates are is by testing the market by advertising. But that's something that, creates its own stress and headaches as well. So obviously there's a lot of benefits to renting. The first two of cash flow benefits, reducing capital required to farm this land. Just to give you an idea, like if we're looking at say $4,000 an acre land, say a 20-25 year term at 5% interest. If we were to average that interest over the whole life of that loan, and if it's a 25-year loan, we're talking about pretty much a farming career, it's like $120 an acre of just interest payments alone on that. If we were to add in the principal payments, about $160 an acre, that's $280 an acre, principal plus interest per acre per year for that $4,000 an acre land. So we can really see the attractiveness to renting. So we can buy that land and secure it, and not to say that renting the preferred course of action, but once we find that those purchased acres have built up some equity and our debt is reduced, then our efficiencies start to increase. But we often find that having to buy those acres outright, you're using bought and paid for acres to subsidize those purchase acres. And if we're using those numbers that I threw out there, often it's a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio. So you can see where as a farm, if you're going to make a big purchase of farmland, you can make that one purchase, and then after that, you might not be able to make any purchases until you build up some equity in that land. Now, I always hear, well, there's nothing like equity, and you don't build equity in rented ground, and that's for sure. But paper equity really only helps you in debt leveraging, and then once the land is sold. And other than that, it doesn't really help you. So it's just to keep that in mind. And I know a lot of producers are looking at this thinking, well, if I can rent some land for cheaper than what I can for buy it, then why not? And that's why it's been such a big question, why it's such a large issue right now. So I think it's also important to understand the types of landlords that are out there. And as we move down this list, we move from landlords that are a little less sure of the farming, and as we move down the list, treat it much more like a business. So one group of landlords, retired farmers, they know their stewardship. They usually know what the land values are for rental rates and the like. So they usually have a pretty easy time renting out the land. But as we move away from that, and we get to that generation removed farming family, so this would be the landlord that doesn't have any direct involvement in the farm anymore, that is renting. Their knowledge is a little less sure of what's going on in the countryside. Their knowledge of land rental rates are a little less sure. So what they really want is, they really want to make sure that they're not getting taken advantage of. They want to partner with a good farm to reduce some stress. So just knowing what they're looking for can tailor producers and how they manage their landlords. The non-resident landlord would be, say, someone living in BC or Ontario that still owns lands and rents. They're, again, a little more removed from the situation. Again, maybe struggling with understanding what's going on with the rental rates, especially what we've seen, like Lionel said, over the past few years with the grain prices doing what they've done. Individual investors, there's a number of those out there. They're treating this more like a business. It's more about the dollar. There's still a connection between the farmer and this landlord, and that there's communication and relationships between the two. But again, this is treating it more like a business. And then lastly, we have our institutional investors or large non-farm corporations that own land. So those would be the ones that are, in a different business. They happen to own some land, so they're renting it out. These ones are really, it's about the dollar, and they're looking to maximize their investment. It's not to say we have a huge amount of these in the province. You might see more of these out in the prairie provinces, but we do have some of these, and it is important to understand where they're coming from. So before I jump into some numbers, I think it's always important to talk about those good characteristics of good land rental agreements. One of the big ones is that landlord and producer be open and honest with each other and be able to solve any problems. It's not to say that there won't be problems in these agreements. The problems isn't the issue. It's the inability to solve those problems, the inability to communicate about these problems. So to have two groups that are able to sit down and have a comfortable conversation about what needs to happen, that's a huge, huge thing. And that's something that definitely we want to aim for. We want to make sure that this agreement has both parties profiting, because if both parties profit and have success from it, then we're going to lead to longer term relationships, and I think that's better for everybody. Written agreements aren't so much to nail someone in court, so to speak, or anything like that. What the benefit of written agreements in my mind is that it's clearly laid out what everybody's responsibilities are along with timelines, and everyone acknowledges what these responsibilities are, and then it leads for a lot better communication and a lot more predictable way to be able to resolve any issue. So I really think that those written agreements really shine in that aspect, that it clearly outlines what everybody is required to do. So there should be some flexibility in here to adjust for anything that's unexpected. We should be able to have an agreement that works for people, but yet still remains simple enough that people can understand what's going on in it and don't need to bring in a lawyer every single time that there's an issue. And lastly, this lease period should be long enough to allow the farmer to adopt good farming practices and stewardship. I'm going to speak a little bit about stewardship at the end of my presentation. But it's not to say that anyone's going to lock in for a 15-year lease. It's not saying that. What we're saying is that even if you're locking in at 3-year leases, I often talk with a lot of landlords and producers that have been renting with each other for 20 years. So those types of long-term relationships are good for both parties. They're good for the land, and they essentially show what these characteristics, so that they're shining in the sense that that's really what we want to achieve here. So if we can partner with the right people, get the right situation, and have a long-term relationship, everybody wins. Okay, so we got to the point where, I've done this preamble, but you know what? I haven't really answered any questions yet. Just like the good government worker here saying, okay, that's fine. Let's get down to brass tacks here. What is land rent? So obviously market influences are quite large. Again, because it's a dark market, we can't jump into that. So we're going to look at the two ways to determine land rent. One's the production cost method. The other one is the land value method. I like to think of these as the foundation pieces for where these rental values come from, because they will always be looking at both of these when it comes down to whatever the land rent bids are. So these are kind of the underlying factors for land rent. So all of our costs that we're using in here come from our cost of production bulletin and budget. So you can find that. It's in Excel form, it's in PDF form like the cover here, it's on our website. It's also, we have a new mobile phone and tablet calculator that you can use to figure out your own cost of production. And it's very important that producers figure out their own cost of production. I think we'll see as we walk through these methods, the value in doing that, and you can see what you can pay for land rent in your area. So we're going to start with the production cost method. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to look at grain yield and grain price. And for gross revenue, we're going to look at the operating costs, and those operating costs have been significant in the last couple of years. We're going to look at labor costs, equipment costs, storage costs, and lastly, the producer profit expectation. Because again, if a producer's not making profit in these agreements, then why are they doing it? Quite simply. So let's take a look at some of these yields, because as we're going to see, the yields and the prices do have a huge impact as to what we can pay for land rent. This is MASC, Manitoba Ag Services Corporation, through the Management Plus program, last 10 years of red spring wheat averages. We can see here, quite a bit of variability, and we can also see in the last 10 years, the average has been 57.9 bushels per acre. So I think whenever producers doing this look at calculating land rent, it's important that they look at what's going on in their farm, look at their historical yields, because we want to be accurate with this. Look at canola, again, same source, last 10 years, the average is just over 41 bushels an acre. Maybe a little bit of a concerning trend is this dotted line is the trend. We see it going down. However, in 2021 with the drought, there was a pretty big drop in yield. Take that one out, and obviously that trend isn't like that, but the drought still happened. We still need to manage for that, and if we don't, we are just lying to ourselves and figuring out what we can pay for land rent. Last crop we're going to look at is soybeans. These are again, same source, average yields about 35.5 bushels per acre. Again, some wild variability here between 21 drought and then last year with a pretty decent average yield. So again, this does make for some challenges when we start trying to figure out what we can pay for land rent, especially if we're looking at 3 and 5 year terms. Looking at the grain prices, this is from our market and statistics group. We can see the 3 crops here. This is from August of 21 to just last week. The challenge with these land rents is everybody's looking in this area here of these high prices when canola was in 20s and wheat was in the mid-teens. That's obviously not the case when we look at these current prices here. It's something that, again, the challenge with dealing with, say, some landlords that aren't always in tune with what's going on. Why should they be? That's not their primary business, but they may have heard about the big grain prices because that was in the news, and now no one's really talking as much about these softening grain prices. So that's some of the challenges that we have, not only in landlord relationship, but also in not lying to ourselves when we come up with these calculations. This is our cost of production comparison. We could see here, these are for the main crops. We can see here over the last several years before 21, we've had this kind of steady appreciation of increasing operating costs. And it was going up, 2, 3, 4, 5% per year. But it was in 2020, after the end of 21 and into 22, and then now fully into 23, we're really seeing a jump in these costs here in these last 2 bars of each of these crops here. So that's definitely changed the dynamics of this. And I often say that when we were operating in this pre-21, pre-22 year or years, we kind of had a gut feeling of where the profitability would lie, not only in our cropping decisions, but also whether or what we're going to bid for rents on land and like. But now in the last few years, the numbers have just gone so volatile that we really need to get down and sharpen the pencil and start doing these numbers on our own to really make sure that we don't catch ourselves offside with some of these costs and profits. So we use a program called Rent Plan. It's in a PDF form. We have it in Excel, and we also have it on our online mobile-friendly versions. I actually have some screenshots of that one, so you can use it on your phone, on your tablet. So that works out pretty good. So going to the premise of this for the production cost method is very simple. It's going to take the gross revenue, which is yield times price, subtracting the operating costs, subtracting the labor costs, subtracting equipment costs, subtracting storage, subtracting the producer profit expectation, and that leaves you with the maximum amount of land rent that you can pay for your farm. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about equipment costs here. So I will talk to producers and say, well, you know, if I'm going to pick up another quarter section, half section of land, I'm not really having to add any equipment. So I can actually put zero in that line and, you know, come up with a higher land rental amount that I could bid. And that's only a little bit true. Obviously, there's going to be operating costs for that equipment as you're running over more ground, you know, in terms of repairs and fuel and the like. But something that I think we really need to capture is the depreciation costs for adding those extra acres. And I'm not so much talking about what the accountant puts in on the CRA return for the depreciation for tax purposes. I'm more talking about a real world depreciation of how much each hour costs for that piece of equipment. So if you're running a combine and you put on 200 hours of thrashing, separating hours a year on it, and now you've added this land and now you're putting on 250 hours, how much less is that combine worth at the beginning of the season versus the end of the season? And then we can take that amount, divide it by the hours, and then we can come up with an hourly cost, a real world hourly cost of depreciation. And we can add this up over our equipment lines. We're going to find out, especially if we're running bigger equipment, especially, or more newer equipment, but especially with these elevated equipment prices that we've seen over the last few years, we can still see some significant equipment costs, even if we just look at that little narrow piece of depreciation. And it, you know, it might be, you know, instead of, you know, 80 or $100 an acre of equipment costs, then it still might, the depreciation of that might be 40, $50 an acre. So we still need to be able to not lie to ourselves on that end. So here's a screenshot of our calculator online. We can see here, we can pick our crops. I've cut out a bunch of the other empty columns. There's a number of columns we can do. We can select the different crops that we grow, and then we can put in the acres of each crop that we're growing. And that's important because this is essentially going to weight average things, because as we go in and if we're going to bid for land rent and it's going to be a 3-year term, you're not going to grow the same crop, you know, each year of the 3 years. You're going to put it into your rotation and go from there. So this allows us the weight average to see what that does with this. So we're not just focusing on, say, a very profitable crop or a crop that's not very profitable. We're looking at it from the whole farm perspective. From there, we can put in our probable yield, and this one's in bushels per acre. We can put in our price per bushel. I would like to, or I would suggest producers look at new crop pricing because, again, this is a bit of a forward-looking document. You can see here, I think I'd probably be able to buy a lot of canola right now for $17 per bushel in new crop. We're going to flex some of these and show how sensitive it is. And then we can put in our operating cost per acre for each of the crops. And then we can use this basis to come up with, again, our gross revenue and our operating costs and do our calculations. Our calculations look like this. So here we can see where our gross revenue is. We can subtract our operating costs we talked about, subtract any labor or costs, subtract those equipment costs that we talked about, and then we have amount before profit that we can pay. So if we say that the producer profit expectation range is between $20 and $40 an acre, and that's just a number that we've thrown in there, different people are going to have different numbers. We're going to come up with a range in this example of $85 to $105, with an average being $95 per acre. So again, it's pretty basic. The gross revenue minus operating costs, minus the any labor costs, equipment costs, our profit expectation, and then it comes out with how much we can bid for this land according to our farm and still turn this $20 to $40 per acre profit. So there's some clear strengths to this. Again, clear, a way to calculate. It allows producers to measure profitability on rented ground, assuming that you're using your cost of production, you're not lying to yourself on some of these impacts. It is what it is, right? It calculates a number, and that's what the number is. The other thing is, I think it also gives landlords appreciation for what some of the margins are, and I will point landlords to this resource quite a bit, just so that they understand that, you know, it's that the margins are still tight, even though everything's elevated. There's still, you know, some tight margins out there with some of these costs. There are limitations. Obviously, it doesn't factor in any market influences. That producer profit expectation is different things to different people. What should it be? You know, it's something that only producers themselves can answer. And then lastly, the big one is that it's highly sensitive to yield and price estimates. So the challenge with this is that we're essentially taking a 1-year snapshot of things, and if we're going to look at a 3 or 5 year lease, obviously it gets hard to see what those values are looking out into the future. So that's why we really need to be realistic with our estimations and the numbers we're using in this. Otherwise, it could run away on us. And I'm going to show an example here of kind of the, you know, maybe, I don't know if you want to call it the uglier side of things, but if we're to use those average yields in those slides that I shown earlier, and these are new crop pricing from end of day yesterday, just some rounded numbers for new crop pricing. We put those in there, and we can see that we really shrunk what we can pay. We were at 95, and now we're down to $49 an acre. So just those movements there, we've seen a dramatic reduction in what we can pay for land rent based on that those numbers. I think this is a good way to do things. I think this is also it is sobering in knowing when the bottom falls out. And again, it gives you an idea where that line is for what you can pay. I was speaking with a young producer, I believe it was at Egg Days, and he says, "Oh, I used your rent plan resource." I said, "Oh, that's good." He says, "Yeah, I put all my numbers in," and he says, "I was even probably a little bit more optimistic when I should have, and I still didn't get the land." I said, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." And he says, "No, it's not all bad," because he said, "Is clearly I wouldn't have been making money on those land rents, and probably even would have been losing money. You know what? I can take my time and my money and go do something different and make some profit. I don't need to be spinning my wheels with this." And that's the thing, is that it does create that understanding and awareness of where you are in the world, and where these profit points are and where they're not. So the second method we're going to look at is the land value based method. It's essentially looking at land value, investment rate, and property taxes, and coming up with a rental amount based on those factors. Farm Credit Canada, through their Farmland Values Report, has some excellent information that I encourage people to go look there. These are the annual land value increases in Manitoba over the last 10 years, and we can see that we're starting to creep up again in these land values. So, it's something that obviously this appreciation does affect the amount that you pay for land rent in Manitoba. So here's a screenshot of the land value based method. Essentially, we take the land value, and then we look at a rate of return, and here we have 1 3/4 to 2 1/4%. And then we add in our property taxes on a dollars per acre basis, and we come up with a range. And the range for this example is $83 to $102 per acre, with an average of $93 per acre. So if we were to look at this inclusive of the property taxes, it's 2.2 to 2.7 rent to land price ratio, which is about 2.5%. So Farm Credit Canada actually has some data on this, and I think they came up with 2.4%. It is what that ratio is. So 2.4% of the land value is the annual rental amount. So we're right in that ballpark there with those ratios. So the nice thing about doing it this way is that it's a clear and easy way to determine land rent based on those land values. Roughly, for every $1,000 of land value, there's about 25 bucks an acre of land rent. $3,000 is 75 bucks an acre, just for some easy math. It allows landlords to compare their investments, those ones that have other investments and maybe are not as emotionally tied to land. They can say, okay, well, I'm doing this in the stock market, doing this with some other investments. Is this land worth holding? Allows it to be easy to be able to compare that. There are limitations. What's the land value? That's not always the easiest thing to do. We do have assessments that we can use, but assessments aren't always accurate in reflecting current market values. There's also other influences on that land that can throw these calculations out. So if it's close to a city or a town and there's urban residential valuations on that land is essentially worth more because it's close to a city, so that those other influences will skew these results. So we need to really look at just the egg land, egg value land for that example. What investment rate do you use? That's a tough one, especially with these volatile times we're in, with the interest rates going up and GIC rates going up, everything like that. What do we use? What are we happy with? I mean, you can put whatever number you want in there, but if you're not going to get it, it doesn't really mean anything. And it also doesn't capture that high demand, low demand in the market dynamics. I've spoken with landlords. Two landlords that were 10 miles apart had the same productive capacity land. One was at $65 an acre. The other one was $120 an acre rent. And the difference between the two is that one was in a low demand rental market, not a lot of producers bidding on land, and the other one was in a really hot market. So, that's the challenge with that method. So a few other things to consider here. When's the payment made? Generally, payments in the spring carry discount because there's less risk. There's time value of money. So we can make adjustments for that. I always talk about the sleep at night factor. If you're up worrying about things and maybe at loggerheads with either the landlord or the producer, depending on what side of this coin you're at, that's not very good. If we can have a good relationship, that is worth so much. And then also, we want to promote those superior land stewardship practices to prevent that mining of the soil, because that does obviously carry a cost. We do have a rent plan resource way that you can see the cost to that if you're put in the beginning nutrient amount and the ending nutrient amount, and if that amount goes down, we can average that over the life of the lease contract and show what the cost of that is on a dollars per acre basis. But I find that when we talk about stewardship with landlords, they're often very unsure of it, and I kind of get a chuckle when I read this out. Nice looking crop, that's good land stewardship. Nice looking equipment, well, that's good land stewardship. Farmer's easy to talk to and it works well with us, that's good land stewardship. Pays on time, that's good land stewardship. And I don't mean to say this jest or anything, but you take a step back, think of it from a landlord's perspective. If it's a nice looking crop, the farmer's easy to work with and they always pay, well, that's a good farmer. And what do good farmers generally tend to do? They tend to look after their land. So why would a landlord think anything different than that, right? And so when we get into the discussion about having superior land stewardship, it gets to be very difficult to get too much into the details because, again, the landlords, this is not their business, this is not what they do, so they'll often measure their producer based on these traits. However, I want to throw out there something that maybe we can move towards, that if this is becoming an issue or a concern with being able to prove and demonstrate land stewardship. Well, there are a couple, very basic ways to do that. One's participation in Fertilizer Canada's 4R nutrient stewardship program, counting the acres of 4R. It's working with a 4R agronomist for beneficial nutrient application. I think that that's definitely something that we can demonstrate to a landlord if that's something that is a concern of them. Fertilizer Canada, Government of Manitoba, and Keystone Lake producers have an understanding with 4R, so it's something that we can demonstrate to a landlord. The other one is completed Manitoba Environmental Farm Plan. With the online platform, it's a great way to get the certification through this. It's really slick and such a good good and easy way to get this. And what this shows is that a farmer is being mindful of how their farm interacts with the environment and trying to come up with beneficial management practices for what they're trying to do, again, their interaction. I think just a producer going through that and having certification, that shows that they're mindful of this. And these are just some easy ways to demonstrate some superior land stewardship without getting into the weeds, without getting too much detail where we start to lose our land. So I just want to throw that out there for the land stewardship item. So obviously, what does this mean? Well, you can see on that little picture, the elevator buttons, it seems like land rent goes up. It doesn't really ever seem to go down. The market ultimately determines these land rents. But I would say that if we can partner with good people, and it doesn't matter if you're on the landlord side of this coin or the producer side of this coin, if you partner with good people, you have trust, communication, cooperation, and you really have a positive outcome and a positive effect. This leads to long-term relationships, so benefits both, and also that also will help provide superior land stewardship. Pointing out that the highest or lowest dollar paid for land rent doesn't make for the best arrangement. If it's the lowest dollar paid and the landlord's looking for new renters because of that, that's not going to be in the producer's best interest. The same on the highest is that if the landlord's squeezing the producer so hard, they're probably going to find out that their turnover for tenants is going to be higher, and that's not going to help with the land stewardship or even profitability in the long run. And I've even talked to landlords who have squeezed really hard and end up not getting paid in that last year because of a dispute or whatever the case may be. And I tell these producers, well, or I tell these landlords, well, if you don't get paid for your last payments, you got to take what you got paid, divide it over your acres, and you probably could have partnered with a better farmer, got just a little bit less in land rent, but had no stress, get paid on time, have your land looked after. I think that's very important. Well-written agreements clear the state, what everybody's responsible for. And I think, again, that rent plan just allows everyone to understand where they're coming from, appreciate everyone's position with that. We have a few other resources as I wrap up my presentation here. We have some YouTube land rent videos, one from a producer perspective, one from a landlord's perspective, and agreements, because we do have sample agreements on our website. Just look up Manitoba Agriculture Contracts and Leases, and you'll find some cash rent leases samples that you can use, or you can take to your lawyer and get them to base an agreement on. Lori, bless her heart, she's going to throw this webinar in there as well, so we'll have them all in one place. So that'll be good. And one last thing, Lionel asked me to talk or just to mention briefly about pasture rental rate calculators. Ben Ham is our farm management specialist who works with this. He's the guru, if you will, about this. But I will say is that Lionel's question was, are we going to start to see pasture rental rates coming up? This is a cost-based calculation based on, much like the rent plan, just based on costing. So if the costing goes up, these values will go up. But let's be honest with ourselves, when times are good in an industry, costs will come up as well. So if we're going to predict about pasture rental rates going up, down, or whatever the case may be, there's more buys for it to go up, just because, again, a rising tide lifts all boats, and that includes rental costs. So with that, Lionel, that is the end of my presentation. I think you did say that there's already a few questions pop in.
You bet, Darren. And I'm going to go to one of the latest ones that have come in, because when you were talking about equipment costs, and this question is, he needs more land to cover the cost of getting extra equipment to make the whole process better. So does that mean that number would come down because I'm getting the extra acres, or?
Well, that depends, and that's what I would do in that situation is look at what is it right now, and then what is it going to be. So the what if is what it's going to be, and then compare those two. So there's fixed costs. Fixed costs are equipment and land costs. Obviously, when we're dealing with land rent, we don't have a land cost component in there, but they're both kind of handled the same way. There's a few different ways you can look at it. One way to look at it is add up all of your equipment payments that you have, and that is essentially your costs on the equipment. Then you can you'll have your repairs, and then there's fuel, stuff like that. But if we just look at what is that equipment actually costing me, we can look at it from just a cash in, cash out basis. What are my payments on just equipment? Add that all up, both principal plus interest, divided by the acres that we have. That gives you a number. That doesn't capture depreciation. So we have to be aware of that. And I mentioned that some of this equipment is getting to be very expensive, and it does cost us, dollars to run this equipment. And, some of these big fancy combines, it might be $200-300 an acre of depreciation alone. So we want to make sure we capture that. But again, we could go to our tax statement, find that depreciation line item, take the total amount, divide it by our acres. That is a depreciation amount, but that's meant for tax purposes. That's not a real world situation. When I say real world, what do you buy that piece of equipment for? How long do you use it? And then when you sell it, what is it worth? The difference, that's the depreciation, and we need to divide that by years and then acres, and then we can come up with a true cost of depreciation on our farm. So I would start looking at that type of stuff to look at the two scenarios, because the risk is that you go from what you feel is you got a little bit too high equipment expense, and you make these changes, and actually you have an even higher equipment expense per acre. And I don't know if that's necessarily moving in the right direction, especially if there's not some other benefit that's happening that we can quantify. If there's no other benefit that's happening, you're actually becoming less competitive, because you're now burdening yourself with extra costs on a per acre basis. So what we want to try to do is we want to take that, and we're going to take on this extra land rent. We want to try to drive down these costs and drive down that equipment cost. So that's where I say, figure out the beginning or the current situation, figure out what it is that this what if scenario looks like, do the math on both sides, and then you can kind of compare, and then you're comparing apples to apples to see if it's a good move.
Yeah, good point. And I guess with depreciation nowadays on equipment, it seems like used equipment has gone up in value more than anything. So
yeah, I've heard one farmer tell me, he says, well, actually I can sell it now for more than what I paid for it, so I actually have appreciation. And it's like, fine, but in all honesty, and even time value of money is a big thing that we don't even talk about. Like, $50,000 10 years ago is not worth $50,000 today. But I think we can all agree that generally this equipment goes down in value, and maybe some goes down quite a bit on a per hour basis, and some not near as much. So we just need to be able to understand that, and even if we're using some numbers, and they don't need to be 100% accurate, but just as long as we're using some numbers and we get some comfort with there, we're making the best decision we can with the information that we have, and that's kind of what we're gunning for here.
Okay. Does anybody do a 1/3, 2/3 agreement anymore?
It's not as much. No, what we do see that's starting to pick up is a flex lease agreement. So the crop share agreements, I find a lot of crop shares are actually flex lease agreements. So a true crop share is, whatever that split is, the landlord actually sells their proportion of grain to the elevator. They actually get a grain check from the elevator. They actually have costs, acre insurance costs, these types of costs they incur. That's a true crop share. What I find most people do is they say, oh, we have this split, say, 1/3, 2/3 for example, but it's a check that goes from the farmer to the landlord. And that's more flex lease, and especially in CRA's mind, and I advise anyone to talk to their accountant if they're in a situation wondering where they stand, because it does have impacts on the lifetime capital gains exemption on land. But I would say that if it's just a check going across, it's most likely a flex lease. And a flex lease is essentially, in good times, the producer pays more, and in poorer times, the producer pays a little bit less. We do have in that rent plan resource a flex lease calculation method, and showing some of the points for a good flex lease agreement. There needs to be a lot of trust in that type of agreement, though, and there needs to be comfort. So I find that there's not as much of that type of stuff. Most people just they like the surety, if you will, of a cash lease agreement where they know what they're going to get paid, and they're happy with that.
Okay. Do I need to get a lawyer involved when drawing up the lease, or for example, I guess the leases on our website, are they, binding?
I would always say to have the lawyer, get a lawyer involved if you're concerned. I'm not a lawyer. These agreements, they don't represent legal advice. But what these agreements on our website are meant to do, it's meant to speed the conversation along, if you will. I know a lot of producers will take these sample agreements to their lawyer, go over it with their lawyer, make sure that all their needs are looked after, and then go in and sign them. Maybe they might make some adjustments to those contracts, and sometimes they don't. I think it's always good to talk with the lawyer, and it might even just be a phone conversation. It doesn't need to be anything overly involved or anything like that. It's always good to talk about what your concerns are, because I do find people, whether they're a tenant or whether they're a landlord, they have different concerns. So if they have a specific concern, it should be addressed in that written agreement. Because again, the benefit to the written agreement is that people are acknowledging what their responsibilities are.
Okay. Well, Darren, the last comment was a great topic and well presented. So thanks, Darren. Good again on you for coming up with good information. It's probably maybe not as easy a topic to talk about sometimes, but you did a great job. So thanks for coming on today.
Much appreciated. Anytime, Lionel.
Okay, so we are going to go to the crop scouting panel now, and first question we have, and this is in help from John Hurd, but some and Marla, I guess, but the urease inhibitors. And one of the questions John's been getting is, when do you use urease inhibitor products, even when the grower is using low risk applications like UAM dribble mixed with ATS? So maybe if you want to start with that one, John, and then we'll kind of go to the other two questions after you're done. Is John there today?
He is on. I'm not sure why we can't hear him. Oh.
Okay, Marla, you're in the car listening. Can you give us some information on this?
Hey, yeah, hopefully John can. I see John, I think, is trying to unmute himself, but it doesn't seem to be working. So I don't know if there's somebody else in the office he can connect to, but he can jump in as goes on. So the urease inhibitor product. So if you're dealing with a urea-based product, and you are dribbling, surface applying, and you want to slow that the urease enzyme, essentially, which is transforming that from the urea into the ammonium. And so that is what the urease inhibitor is doing. It's slowing that transformation from urea into ammonium, which is going to decrease your risk of ammonium volatilization. And that ammonia volatilization is going to be happening again when you have that surface product. If you are putting product into the ground, doing tillage to incorporate it, or you're banding it, then you don't have that potential problem for the ammonia volatilization to happen. But where you have that sitting on the surface and you don't have rain in the next, few days, then that is when you get that benefit from having the urease inhibitor. Of course, if you put a urea-based product or a down or an ammonium-based product and you get a good douse of a half inch of rain right after, then that's going to move that product into the ground. So really what you're doing with those products is you're giving yourself a little bit of kind of protection for buying some time when you don't have rain after you surface apply.
Okay, so
I hear John.
I am. I think the government has shut my computer down 3 days in advance of my departure. So I'm sitting in Dave Kaminsky's office, and of course, Marla covered that part well. I just wanted to mention that the other question I get is about the other way that we've often thought in the past to bulletproof our urea or nitrogen is to put it in the soil. And in the past, we've seen some research that shallow incorporated, if it's broadcast urea, can still be subject to this volatilization loss. And that's caused some concern with people that shallow band their urea. We find that as long as, and our farmers are smart here in Manitoba, as long as you close that slot, or if you're running a press wheel or firming it, we don't lose nitrogen from volatilization from those shallow bands. Be smart. You use machinery, not a purchased additional product to protect your nitrogen. Just simply make sure your bands are covered and firmed up with like a packing wheel, like they are with side banding. So sometimes we do need the valuable products that are out there to prohibit or slow this loss, and other times machinery is our friend. And that's all I'll say about that. I've got other things to talk about, but since my slides aren't cooperating today, I will just mute myself, I guess.
I'm just going to jump in though, John, and say I'm glad that you brought up about the shallow incorporation, because that is often that question around using like a vertical till unit or a really shallow scratching in tillage, and it's just not enough to cover that up. So thanks for adding that.
So guys,
I'm going to butt in here. Just say the other questions I'm getting is about phosphorus. And for people, just remember that seed place safety guidelines are out there. I've seen a lot of people trying to shove more nitrogen than normal in the seed row. Don't know where that notion's coming from. Just a reminder that ESN is safer in the seed row, but Alberta research shows that only you can put on 3 times as much as you could with bare naked urea, but there's still a limit to what you can put on as ESN. So be careful with that. And the other thing, and this will be Marla's unveiling, is that we now have we'll soon be going live, a new Prairie developed nutrient removal calculator online using Prairie data. And it's, we'll go on soon. Marla, you can spill the beans in a couple weeks on this show.
okay, here's a question then for you guys. So you're talking about the shallow tillage or vertical tillage. What if I'm seeding canola and we want to seed canola shallow? So then I should be probably using one of these products because I may lose some of my nitrogen. Like if I'm doing one pass, I may lose some of my nitrogen.
No, not if you're side banding or mid-row banding. You put that down there, you put a press wheel and firm up. Depth, to my way of thinking, depth is less important than the packing that goes on over that band. Now, if you're mid-row banding and you're leaving that a loose and open slot, well, you're getting, you deserve what you get. Put it in deep enough or design something, or make sure you seal that slot up. And if you can't manage that with machinery, well, then you're stuck buying a more expensive product. But farmers are smart enough to figure this out. They don't want to spend more money on fertilizer additives than they need to.
Okay, well, that's great. And thanks, John, for running over to Dave's office and getting on and helping us out today. So thanks, John. Next question, Marla. I had a producer call and he had somebody talking to him about gypsum and his saline areas. He's still trying to fight some of these saline areas he has. And this is the same guy that keeps asking me about different products. So I thought I'd see what you had, any comments regarding about gypsum and adding it to my saline areas to help improve it.
Yeah, so lots of times people are interested in things like gypsum because we hear that, there's issues around soil structure that might be related to some of the salinity problems. So the gypsum is added because of the calcium. That's why that recommendation is there. Now, that being said, we have very high calcium rates in our soils that tend to be based on a lot of limestone. And so calcium is not usually a problem in our soils. It's very, very rare that we have structural problems that can be aided by the addition of calcium in Manitoba. There are a couple of very specific issues that may show up, one of them being high sodium rates in comparison to calcium. That is a sodic soil. So here's where things get confusing. A sodic soil can be improved by adding calcium. So you could add gypsum to be able to improve a sodic soil. Sodic soils we refer to as alkali soils, and they're called alkali because they tend to have a very, very high pH, like 8.5 and higher. Alkali is a word that we use kind of to be able to, we call saline patches or those white patches alkali. The problem is that they are not actually alkali, they're saline. So the issue becomes that we end up confusing, I think, some of the words. So if you go online and you Google, how do I fix an alkali patch? It'll tell you to add calcium, add gypsum. But the problem is salinity is not alkali. Sodicity, or high sodium in relation to calcium and magnesium, is a structural problem that is not salt related, even though it's sodium in the name, and it's caused by high sodium. It's a structural problem with soil that can be fixed with adding calcium. So a salinity problem, that is a salt problem. Salt is not just sodium. Salt is things like sulfate-based things that are naturally occurring. Sulfate is also in gypsum. So obviously we're just adding more of things that can be affecting it. So salinity is a water problem only. There is no magic dust or magic product that we can apply to fix a salinity problem. Salinity is about drainage, and salinity is about maximizing water uptake by crops to lower a water table. It will come and go as water kind of fluctuates. It will depend on whether we have high rates of evaporation versus precipitation, because then you have more upward water movement. Salinity is all about water, and unfortunately there isn't a magic way that we can apply any product to be able to fix a saline problem. But again, we need to work on our vocabulary. It's something that we work on hard, but it's really hard to kind of change the vocabulary because alkali is not the same as salinity. Alkali is a completely different problem, and the management of it gets confused sometimes because then we start thinking we can use things like gypsum to fix saline patches.
Great. Thanks, Marla. That's good information there. And again, it's gets rather confusing with some of the wording there. But great. Thanks, Marla. Okay, with that, I guess just wanted to mention there's just one thing. There's Marla, there's a lot of areas in Manitoba that have low calcium. It's about a balance of calcium, magnesium. If you don't have enough calcium, you need lime to gluclate a high magnesium soil, then gypsum, humic acid will chelate salts and sodium to reduce toxicity.
Yeah, all I would say there is that if you actually have a high magnesium problem in comparison to calcium, then there can be times when calcium again can be beneficial. So There are two kind of problem or things that you can use calcium to apply and deal with. One is a high magnesium issue and one is a high sodium issue. You have to have those problems and be able to properly document those problems to be able to choose to use calcium as a supplement to kind of shift those balances.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marla. Okay, back to the weed guide. They're available. I think we're getting into that time of year where everybody needs to have a copy. So they're available at all the service centers, or if you're wanting to get larger numbers, contact your either your service center or your crop extension specialist, and they will help you get them. And there they are, the crop production extension specialist. There's our contact information and locations throughout the province. So feel free to contact them anytime. Our livestock people, again, if you've got questions regarding getting cattle ready for pasture, because we're getting closer, or you're into calving season now and nutrition, definitely give these guys a call. Our service center offices, there's their locations, their 1-800 numbers, also Manitoba Ag's number. Lori is usually on that line a lot of times, her and Aaron. So if you guys got questions, you'll be talking with them and they can definitely help you out. Hay listing service, still some guys out there just trying to get rid of some feed from last year. If you're wanting some feed or have some feed for sale, definitely go to that listing to get what you need. And with that, that's it for today. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and join us next week, May 3rd, as we get closer and closer to getting out into the field. Thanks for attending.